The South Sea Bubble Crash. In 1720, the South Sea Company caused one of the most famous financial disasters in history. It had started years earlier with a big promise. It would help manage Britain's huge national debt, and in return, it would get trading rights in South America, even though that area was controlled by Spain and British. Merchants couldn't really trade there. Still, the idea sounded exciting and full of profit. The company didn't have ships or real trade. It just had a great story, and that was enough. The British government was directly involved. They were helping the company grow. Parliament allowed the South Sea Company to take over a chunk of the country's debt. Here's how it worked. People who had lent money to the government before were now given shares in the company instead of getting paid back in cash. In return, the company promised it would make huge profits from trade and use that money to pay everyone back, plus extra. That's what made the shares look valuable. But there was a problem. The company wasn't actually doing much trade. Instead of making money through real business, the company started playing a financial trick. It gave out loans to people, and those people used the borrowed money to buy more South Sea Company's shares. In just a few months, the stock price exploded. It began the year at £128 and jumped to over £1,000 by June. Everyone wanted a piece. Nobles, merchants, servants, even people who had never owned stock before. That made the share price go up even more. The whole thing started feeding on itself, with no real profits behind it. At the same time, the company bribed politicians and gave free shares to powerful people to keep support strong. It became a national craze. Other companies rushed to copy the idea. One company even asked for money for an undertaking of great advantage, but no one to know what it is. Like, seriously? By the end of summer, things started falling apart. Some early investors began selling their shares and prices dropped. Rumors spread. The company's fake success couldn't last. When panic selling began, the price crashed from £1,000 to under £150 in just weeks. This was called a South Sea Bubble Crash of 1720s. It was devastating. Wealth disappeared. Some banks collapsed. Historians believe millions of pounds were lost, which is a huge amount for the 1700s. Even the Isaac Newton was caught in the collapse. He sold early and made a profit, but then bought back in at the top and lost around £20,000. It's said he never touched stocks again, and famously said, "I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Afterward, Parliament investigated. Some officials were kicked out or jailed. New laws were made to stop risky investment schemes. The word bubble in finance comes from this event, at the South Sea Bubble, when prices rose on empty promises and then suddenly burst. The Enron scandal. Enron was once one of the biggest and most admired companies in the United States. It started out as an energy company in Houston, Texas, and over the years it grew into a giant dealing in electricity, natural gas, and even internet and communication services. By the late 1990s, it was being called America's most innovative company. Its stock price was soaring. At its peak, Enron was worth around $70 billion. But behind that shiny image, there was something strange going on. Enron wasn't making as much money as it claimed. To keep investors happy, the company started using a complicated trick called mark-to-market accounting. Here's what it meant. Whenever Enron signed a long-term contract, like a 10-year deal to sell electricity, it would instantly show in the record all the expected profits from that entire 10 years as if it had already earned the money on day one. Even if the money hadn't actually come in yet, it would show up on Enron's books like it had. This made the company look way more profitable than it really was. Then came the second layer of the scheme. Whenever a deal turned out to be a bad one, instead of showing a loss, Enron would simply remove it from its books. It created fake companies called special purpose entities, kind of like secret boxes where it could hide its debt. These weren't real businesses. They existed only on paper. Enron used them to move bad investments and losses out of sight, so everything looked clean on the outside. Investors and analysts kept trusting the numbers. In 2000, it reached the 7th position on Fortune magazine's list of top 500 U.S. companies. At this time, the company employed 21,000 people. Employees poured their retirement savings into Enron stock, believing it was a sure thing. But in 2001, things started to unravel. In August 2001, Enron released a financial report that confused everyone. The report showed that Enron was doing deals with companies that were made by itself to hide the losses. The next day, Enron's CEO, Jeffrey Skilling, suddenly resigned without giving a clear reason. As more details came out, the truth became impossible to hide. Investors panicked. Enron's stock price, which had once been as high as $90, fell to just 26 cents in just a few weeks. years. The company filed for bankruptcy in December 2001. At the time, it was the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history. The fallout was massive. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Employees saw their retirement savings accounts wiped out as Enron's stock price continued to plummet. One of the biggest accounting firms in the world, Arthur Andersen, which had helped to cover up the fraud, also collapsed. It had 85,000 employees globally, and almost overnight it was gone. Congress held hearings. Executives were charged. Enron's CEO, Jeffrey Skilling, was sentenced to over 24 years in prison. Fasto, the CFO, got 6 years. Kenneth Lay, the company's founder and former chairman, was convicted too, but he died of a heart attack before sentencing. The Albanian pyramid scheme collapse. In the mid-1990s, Albania was still recovering from decades of isolation under a strict communist regime. The country had only recently opened up to the world, and people were hopeful but confused about how a free market was supposed to work. There were no real financial regulations, almost no banks, and most people had no experience with investing. Into that environment came the pyramid schemes. It started with a few flashy companies promising something that sounded incredible. If you gave us money, we will pay you back more, a lot more. Some schemes promised returns of 25% to 50% per month, which is far beyond what any real investment could ever offer. These companies said they were putting the money into trade, construction, or imports, but they never showed how. There were no details, no public records, and no actual businesses running behind the scenes. So how did it work? The idea is simple. Early investors are paid using the money from newer investors. For example, if you invest $100, the company might give you back $150 next month, but not because they earned a profit. They just took part of someone else's money and gave it to you. The more people who join, the more cash they have to keep up the illusion. It's called a pyramid because of the shape of how it grows. A few people at the top get rich, while the base made up of more and more people has to keep expanding to support them. The moment people stop joining or try to pull out their money, the whole thing collapses. In Albania, this kind of scheme exploded. By late 1996, more than 2/3 of the population had invested. People sold their homes, their cars, their land. Companies like Vefa, Gjallika, and Papuli opened fancy offices, advertised on TV, and even sponsored football teams. For a while, it felt like everyone was getting rich. According to reports, over $1.2 billion had been invested in a country with only 3 million people and one of the lowest GDPs in Europe. In early 1997, a few companies stopped paying returns. That is enough to shake things up in a capitalist economy. People panicked and rushed to get their money back and discovered that the companies were in fact frauds. Within weeks, the entire pyramid collapsed. Riots broke out, army depots were raided, and civilians armed themselves. Cities fell out of government control. Over 2,000 people were killed. International peacekeeping forces had to step in to restore order.